Can you believe that everything you know, the sky above, the ground beneath your feet, the very breath in your lungs, all began not with a bang, but with a terrifying, wet, unending silence? This is not just a story of gods and pyramids. This is the account of the universe's most impossible birth, a catastrophe no one saw coming because there was no one to see it. Before the sun was lit, before the stars were flung across the abyss, there was only Nu, the swirling, chaotic, infinite black water stretching forever in all directions. It was the absolute void, the true definition of nothingness, but somehow, terrifyingly, it was also everything. Imagine staring into that endless darkness, a space so cold and vast that your soul would simply dissolve from the sheer hopelessness of existence. This was the primordial ocean, a boundless deep of formless power, utterly devoid of purpose, light, or life. It was the silence of the damned, the ultimate horror, and out of that impossible horror, something moved. Deep within the crushing depths of Nu, where gravity meant nothing and time was a meaningless joke, an unimaginable will began to stir. It was the great self-created one, the being known as Atum, or sometimes Ra. He was the potential energy of the universe, coalescing into a single, terrifying consciousness, trapped within the cold, black fluid of the deep. Atum existed in a state of pure, agonizing loneliness. He was the first thought, the first spark of heat, desperately trying to find purchase in the non-existence that surrounded him. He had no mother, no father, no past, and no future, only the terrifying necessity of creation. Finally, after an eternity that lasted less than a second, Atum exerted his will. With a cosmic scream that echoed only in his own mind, he focused all his divine power, forcing himself to rise above the surface of Nu. He hauled himself onto the only solid ground available, the primordial mound, the Benben stone, which rose with him from the waters. He stood alone on this tiny island of existence, an absolute power marooned in an ocean of terrifying chaos. But his struggle was far from over. He was singular, and singularity is terrifying. How could he possibly build a universe, a cosmos of staggering complexity, when he was just one entity, standing on a single stone, surrounded by infinite black water? The loneliness was a physical torment, an unbearable pressure that threatened to drag him back into the swirling non-existence of Nu. Atum realized that to escape the void, he had to perform the most shocking, most intimate, and most defining act of self-generation the universe would ever witness. He had to create life from his own body. Can you grasp the magnitude of this decision? To be the universe's only architect, the only source of existence, required unimaginable sacrifice and focus. Atum focused his raw power, his Ka, his life force, and performed the act of solitary generation. Some legends say he coupled with his own shadow. Others whisper that he simply willed the energy out of his mouth. But the most visceral, most horrifying account, the one that truly defines the sheer physical agony of creation, is that Atum reached within himself and extracted the essence of life. And with a heave of divine power, he spat. Yes, he spat the first two gods into existence, from his very essence, brought forth by sheer agonizing will, came Shu, the god of air, and his sister, Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. Instantly, the universe was divided. The perfect, terrible unity of Nu was shattered forever. But Atum was still on his Benden stone, utterly exhausted by the effort, and now his newly birthed children were immediately lost. Shu and Tefnut, the first entities of duality, were flung out into the darkness of Nu. They were swallowed by the infinite black water, destined to wander aimlessly in the cosmic chaos their father had barely escaped. Imagine the horror that seized Atum's divine heart. He had traded his crushing loneliness for agonizing grief. The first beings he ever created were immediately lost to the void. This was the moment the universe nearly ended before it began, a catastrophe no one saw coming, perpetrated by the Creator himself. Atum's fear was so massive, so profound, that it instantly became the foundation of all cosmic anxiety. He cried out, not just in despair, but in desperate hope, straining his divine eye, the Wedged Eye, out into the darkness to search for his lost children. This was not a passive search. The Eye of Atum. Ra was a furious, independent entity, a missile of burning light shot into the infinite darkness. It searched, it scoured, it burned away the blackness, desperately seeking the air and the moisture that were meant to stabilize the nascent cosmos. For a time that felt like another eternity, Atum stood alone again, waiting, listening only to the endless sloshing of Nu, convinced he had failed. He was a creator who had only managed to prove the power of the dark. But then the Eye returned, and it was carrying Shu and Tefnut, dragging them back through the waters, exhausted but whole. The relief that flooded Atum was so overwhelming that the tears streamed down his face. And where those divine tears hit the Benben stone, life exploded. Humans, the first mortal beings, sprang forth from the tears of a relieved god. But the immediate joy was short-lived, because Shu and Tefnut, though saved, were destined for immediate, catastrophic separation. Shu and Tefnut, moisture, coupled, giving birth to the next crucial pair, Geb, earth, and Nut, sky. And this is where the real, agonizing drama of the gods begins. Geb and Nut were born locked in an eternal, passionate embrace. They clung to each other so fiercely, so completely, that there was no room for anything else in the cosmos. Earth and sky were one, a suffocating, unified mass, and creation, the separation of things, the creation of space, was impossible. Atum, having just wept with relief, now had to face his children's children, locked in an embrace that threatened to crush the universe back into nothingness. The only way forward was an act of brutal, essential violence, the forced separation of the first lovers. And it would fall to Shu, the god of air, to tear his son and daughter apart, setting the stage for the greatest tragedy, the greatest murder, and the most epic war that Egyptian mythology, and perhaps all of existence, would ever know. The silence was broken, but the chaos was only just beginning. The scream that ripped through the newborn cosmos was not just the sound of pain, it was the sound of reality being forged in agony. Shu, the god of air, stood eternally rigid, his arms braced against his own son and daughter, holding them in a perpetual agonizing embrace of separation. This was the cost of order. Nut, the sky, was arched above, her body a glittering, impossible curve across the darkness, her extremities touching the edges of the universe, forever yearning for what was stolen. Her beauty was the canopy of existence, but her position was a cage of duty. Below her, Geb, the earth, lay sprawling and tormented. The rumbling of earthquakes were not seismic shifts. They were the groans of the Father, weeping for his lost love. His tears, endless and profound, filled the deepest crevasses and became the first primordial oceans, salty and mournful. The world, the very Duat, was now defined by this unbearable tension, a cosmic rubber band stretched to its breaking point. This forced stability, known as Ma'at, was the highest law of existence, established by Ra himself, the first and greatest sovereign. Ra, having successfully organized the children of his children, now sat upon the throne of creation. His light was absolute, but his reign was not one of peace. It was a daily, terrifying battle against the ultimate enemy, a beast of such scale and malice that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of being. Deep within the watery abyss of Nu, the place from which Ra himself had violently emerged, lurked the serpent of absolute chaos, Apophis. This colossal creature was the physical manifestation of Isfet, the anti-Ma'at, whose sole, maddening purpose was to swallow the sun god and return all existence to the silent, suffocating non-life of the void. Every morning, Ra, in his magnificent solar bark, the Mondes, began his perilous journey across the sky. But every evening, as he descended into the hidden hours of the night, the dreaded Duat below the earth, the battle raged. Apophis lay waiting at the deepest bend of the cosmic river. The serpent's scales were the color of primordial night, and his jaws could encompass constellations. His very breath was a storm of non-existence. Ra was not alone. His vessel was crewed by formidable deities, Sia, the god of perception, Hu, the god of command, and the great tactical mind, Thoth. They protected Ra fiercely, but the threat was eternal. Apophis could be cut, bound, or scorched by the sun's radiance, but he could never truly die, for he was the void given form, and the void endures. The world held its breath between sunset and sunrise, praying that the solar bark would successfully navigate the dark tunnels and re-emerge victorious. But even with the constant war against chaos, a deeper, more personal anxiety began to trouble the great god Ra. Despite the rigid separation imposed by Shu, the yearning of Geb and Nut was too powerful to be entirely subdued. In rare moments when Shu was exhausted from his eternal burden, the sky and the earth touched, not physically, but magically. And from these stolen moments of communion, Nut became pregnant. This was an intolerable cosmic infraction. Ra had decreed, in his divine sovereignty, that no god could be born on any day of the existing 360-day calendar. The children of Geb and Nut, if born, were prophesied to be immensely powerful, a dynasty capable of overthrowing the aging sun god and establishing a new order. Ra's anger was a scorching wind, but the pregnancy could not be reversed. The fate of the cosmos now hinged on preventing their birth. The king's decree was law, and the year would not be altered for a mother's ambition. Yet, one member of the solar bark crew, the master strategist, the silver-tongued god of wisdom and magic, saw a loophole in the absolute decree. Thoth, the ibis-headed savant, understood that if the children could not be born within the year, they must be born outside of it. He devised a plan of impossible cunning. He approached Ea, the magnificent god of the moon, whose light was second only to Ra's, and whose existence was closely tied to the measurement of time itself. Thoth challenged Ea, also known as Khonsu, to a cosmic game of Senate, the sacred board game of destiny. The stakes were astronomical. Thoth gambled his knowledge. Ea gambled a portion of his light. The game spanned days and nights, played out on the dark side of the moon, watched by the silent stars. Thoth, the master of all writing and calculation, prevailed. As his prize, he did not demand gold or power, but light itself. He meticulously extracted 72nd of Aya's lunar illumination. This stolen light, this fractional chunk of cosmic time, was converted into 5 entirely new days. These were the epigomenal days, the days upon the year, days of high magic, outside the decreed calendar, outside the official count, and thus outside of Ra's direct control. The moment Thoth won, the fragile order fractured just enough to allow destiny to rush in. The calendar year now had 365 days, and on the first of these new, unsanctioned days, the eldest son burst forth, Osiris. He was born with a gentle heart, radiating wisdom, and a destined sovereignty over the living and the dead. On the second day, the fierce, golden god Horus the Elder appeared, a hawk tearing itself free from the shell of chaos, ready to inherit the sky. But the third birth was a terrifying spectacle that stained the newly established order with blood and fury. Set, the embodiment of storm and violent change, tore himself free from his mother's side, erupting into existence, not through the womb, but through brute force. He was fire, thunder, and red desert sand, a creature of magnificent, terrifying power, destined to be the counterweight to his gentle elder brother. The fourth day brought forth the most magical being of all, Isis. She was the weaver of spells, the mistress of hidden knowledge, the goddess whose power was so profound that even Ra himself would one day tremble at her name. And finally, on the fifth day, came Nephthys, the dark mirror of Isis, the protector of the silent thresholds, often overshadowed but intrinsically linked to the fate of her violent brother Set. The Great Five, the dynastic children of Geb and Nut, were now walking the earth. They were born of forbidden love and stolen time, a direct defiance of the sun god's will. Ra, watching from his solar bark, realized that Thoth's victory was his greatest defeat. He had lost control of the succeeding generation, and the stage was set for a vicious, epic family drama that would plunge the world into the greatest civil war the gods would ever know. The cosmic scales had tipped violently, irreparably. 5 children, born outside the sanctioned calendar, 5 rogue deities whose very existence was a scream of defiance against the aging sun god Ra. Their birth was not a gentle emergence, but a series of shocking detonations across the void, proving that even the most meticulously ordered cosmos could be fractured by cleverness and sheer will. The first to tear free from the sky womb of Nut was Osiris. He arrived cloaked in the scent of cedar and the promise of barley, a god immediately radiating Ma'at, perfect, balanced, necessary order. He was kingship personified, the heir apparent to the legacy Ra had tried desperately to hold on to himself. Close on his heels came Horus the Elder, the original Sky Falcon, a powerful ancient force. But it was the third birth that truly shook the foundations of creation, casting a shadow that would never lift. Set, the crimson god, the embodiment of storm and desert fury, refused the gentle path. He didn't exit. He ripped himself, shrieking, from the very side of his mother, Nut, leaving a wound in the firmament that bled raw chaos into the ordered world. His arrival was a declaration of war against stability, a visceral rejection of the soft, fertile black land, Kemet, in favor of the harsh, unforgiving red land, Deshret. This immediate, violent entry marked him as the outsider, the necessary antagonist, the god of brute strength and terrible, consuming rage. Then came the two sisters, the anchors of the unfolding drama. Isis, the goddess of 1,000 names, the mistress of magic, the wise, sharp-eyed sorceress who could twist destiny with a whisper, representing cunning and divine protection. And finally, Nephthys, the dark twin, the goddess of boundaries and hidden things, forever linked tragically to the chaotic Set, the shadow required to define Isis's brilliant light. The stage was set, 5 divine players ready to begin the most devastating family feud in cosmic history, all under the furious, watchful eye of their grandfather, Ra. Ra, defeated in his attempt to prevent their coming, was forced to acknowledge the new dynasty. He watched from the deck of his solar bark as Osiris ascended the terrestrial throne. This was the Golden Age, a time sung of by every human who ever drew breath. Osiris took a savage, fearful humanity and lifted them, patiently, from the mud and the dark of their ignorance. He taught them how to till the soil, how to tame the mighty Nile flood with careful irrigation, how to grind the first grains into bread, ending their need to consume each other in fear and hunger. He gave them music, law, and the fundamental concept of justice. Ma'at was not just an idea, it was the foundation of his reign. Osiris traveled the world, leaving a trail of flourishing civilizations and peaceful societies, always accompanied by his devoted sister-wife Isis, whose wisdom tempered his gentle rule. While Kemet blossomed, becoming the most fertile land in the universe, Set festered. Set was the storm god, immensely powerful, capable of shattering mountains and commanding the terrifying winds. Yet he was relegated to the barren wastes, the desert edge where nothing grew but resentment. He was the necessary guardian of Ra's bark against the serpent Apep, the ultimate protector, but he was denied the soft, productive glory of the Nile Valley. Every perfect harvest, every joyous festival celebrated in Osiris's name was a spike driven deeper into Set's venomous envy. Why should the gentle, effeminate brother, who ruled with words and songs, not with strength, hold dominion over everything that mattered? Set saw Osiris's order not as civilization, but as weakness, a stifling confinement of true, raw power. His brother represented everything he despised: stability, comfort, and the denial of the glorious, terrifying freedom of the wild places. The difference in their birthright became the fuel for the plot that would soon shatter creation. The darkness of Set's heart swelled until it consumed him entirely. He began to gather allies, disgruntled gods and demonic desert forces who chafed under the strictures of Osiris's benevolent Ma'at. He looked at Osiris's perfect world and saw only a prize to be violently seized, a jewel to be smashed. He devised a plan, simple, cruel, and utterly brilliant. that would capitalize on Osiris's trusting, generous nature and plunge the entire divine family into a blood feud that would last millennia and define the fate of all humanity. The dark fire that burned in Seth's heart was not merely jealousy. It was the cosmic, terrifying need to dismantle order itself. He viewed his brother, Osiris, not just as a rival for the throne, but as a fatal structural flaw in the universe that needed immediate, violent correction. Osiris's gentleness, his unwavering commitment to Ma'at, felt suffocating to the red god of the desert. Seth, the architect of anarchy, knew he couldn't challenge Osiris in open combat, not while the king was protected by the love of the people and the silent approval of Ra. He needed a trap that appealed directly to Osiris's greatest virtue, his trust, his overwhelming, almost naive belief in the goodness of the divine family. And so, the masterpiece of malice was conceived. He commanded the darkest spirits and the most skilled, tormented artisans to build a coffin, a sarcophagus of unparalleled beauty. It was forged from precious cedar imported from Lebanon, inlaid with sheets of electrum, lapis, and obsidian, shimmering like a captured piece of the night sky, meant to be the envy of every deity who beheld it. But the true horror lay in its dimensions. It was measured with surgical precision, designed to fit only one god, the perfect golden physique of Osiris, and no one else. This was the ultimate personalized prison. The trap was sprung during a magnificent feast celebrating the successful harvest, a bounty Osiris had gifted to the newly civilized people. The wine flowed, the laughter was loud, and the gods were gloriously distracted. Seth dramatically presented his gift, declaring it a magnificent prize for whoever could fit inside it perfectly, claiming he meant it as a fun, drunken party game. One by one, the lesser gods, intrigued by the sheer brilliance of the craftsmanship and the audacious promise, attempted the feat. They were always too short, too tall, too wide, or simply felt uncomfortable in the confines. They laughed, they failed, and the spectacle continued until only Osiris remained. Seth, with a smile that did not reach his burning desert eyes, beckoned his brother forward. Osiris, genial, slightly tipsy, and utterly devoid of suspicion, agreed to try, seeing it as nothing more than harmless fun to appease his wild younger sibling. He lay down in the luxurious, gold-lined interior, and the fit was immediate, absolute perfection. A gasp rippled through the hall as the assembled deities realized the unnatural precision. In that terrifying second of silence, before Osiris could even realize the gravity of his mistake, the genial facade evaporated. Seth roared, a sound like a sandstorm tearing the desert floor, and slammed the massive lid shut. The festive atmosphere shattered instantly, replaced by a paralyzing terror that gripped every god present. His loyal henchmen, the demonic entities and chaos spirits he commanded, rushed forward with massive nails and vats of molten lead. They did not seal the coffin, they welded it shut, turning the beautiful sarcophagus into an impenetrable metal tomb. The muffled, agonizing cries of the king of the living were silenced beneath layers of hot, searing metal. Seth mounted the sealed, gleaming sarcophagus, proclaiming his victory with a triumphant, manic laugh that echoed the breaking of Ma'at across all creation. He had successfully murdered the king of gods, the symbol of order, in front of the entire divine court. The gods fled in hysterical panic, scattering like startled birds. They knew the era of gentle rule was over. The terrifying reign of the Red God had begun. But Isis, the powerful sorceress and grieving wife, did not flee. She stood rooted to the spot, her cosmic power temporarily useless against the sheer audacity of the betrayal. Her scream was not merely the sound of a woman losing her husband. It was the sound of the cosmos fracturing, a primal shriek of despair that caused the river Nile to shudder and the sun itself to dim behind a sudden veil of dust. In her agony, she tore off her robes of state, shedding her identity as queen, adopting the simple, dusty raiment of a desperate mourner. The goddess, whose knowledge eclipsed all others, was now a solitary seeker, driven by a raw, furious, unrelenting love. Her quest began immediately, a hunt for a metallic casket in a world suddenly drowned in chaos. Seth, meanwhile, ensured the destruction was complete. He had the sealed coffin dragged out and cast into the raging currents of the Nile. He wanted the proof of his crime and the body of his brother to be swallowed by the chaotic waters and forever lost to memory. The coffin, now a grotesque vessel of death, sailed rapidly down the Nile, through the delta marshes and out into the vast, turbulent Mediterranean Sea. It was a harrowing, solitary journey for the entombed god, symbolizing the scattering of Egyptian order to the very edges of the known world. The currents carried it, battered and bruised, until it finally came to rest near the Phoenician coast, in the foreign city of Bibles. The very heart of Egyptian divinity was now resting on foreign, non-sacred soil, a testament to Seth's thoroughness. There, a miraculous, unnerving fusion occurred. The shared divine energy still radiating from the imprisoned body of Osiris caused a massive tamarisk tree to spring up instantly around the chest. The tree grew with supernatural speed, its mighty trunk enveloping the sarcophagus entirely, swallowing the metal and wood in a sheath of fragrant, living growth. Osiris was now triple entombed, in metal, in wood, and in the heart of a foreign land. The tree was so beautiful, so fragrant, and so unusually large that the local king, Malcander, and his queen, Astarte, were captivated. They ordered it cut down and installed as the massive central pillar of their royal palace. The king and queen of Byblos unknowingly slept every night beneath the canopy of a pillar that contained the sealed, murdered body of the god of Egyptian civilization. Isis, meanwhile, was relentless. Using her unparalleled magic and her mastery of disguise, she began tracing the body's passage. She knew the Nile would betray the secrets of Seth's crime. She spoke to fishermen, to sailors, to spirits of the marsh, following the faintest trail of divine residue left by her husband's passing. When she finally reached the coast and learned that the chest had been swept far away, her resolve hardened. She understood that this was not just murder, it was a cosmic test. She knew she had to venture into the foreign lands, into the chaos of the unknown, to reclaim the king and restore the fundamental balance of Ma'at that Seth had so arrogantly destroyed. The void left by Osiris was an open wound in reality, a tear in the fabric of Ma'at itself that threatened to unravel the cosmos. Isis, the great sorceress, could not simply weep, she had to act. Her grief was not sadness, it was a furnace, forging her resolve into something dangerous, relentless, and magically precise. She abandoned the glittering halls of the divine council, shedding her celestial robes for the rags of a mortal beggar, a disguise necessary to evade Seth's omnipresent spies, who haunted every corner of Egypt, eager to extinguish any challenge to his throne. She knew the extent of the catastrophe. Seth had not just killed Osiris, he had pulverized him, meticulously scattering the pieces like cosmic dust across the four corners of the known world and beyond. This was the ultimate, calculated violation, the total desecration of the divine form, guaranteeing Osiris could never be made whole again through standard, simple magic. Seth believed he had sealed his victory, turning the King of Eternity into a riddle no one could solve. But Isis had allies in the darkness, even if they were unwitting or secretly sworn. She called upon the primordial forces only she could truly command. Crucially, she sought out Nephthys, Seth's conflicted wife and her loyal sister, who, disgusted by her husband's primal depravity, pledged her silent, secretive aid. Nephthys provided the crucial intelligence, the general direction of the original coffin's trajectory, and the details of Seth's shifting patrol routes. Isis transformed herself, not into the massive, protective vulture of Mut, but into a sleek, swift, black kite, the Ketet bird, a symbol of frantic mourning and powerful, heartbreaking flight. Day and night, she scoured the vast, treacherous papyrus swamps of the delta, whispering incantations to the wind, desperately seeking the faintest telltale sign of residual divine essence, a whisper of her husband's former glory. The journey was not just geographical, it was an exhausting, magical battle fought in miniature. Every fragment of Osiris was protected by natural obstacles and Seth's insidious traps. The swirling currents of the Nile tried to hide the fragments in its murky depths. The shifting sands threatened to bury them forever beneath the desert floor. And monstrous, distorted creatures, now loyal to the new, chaotic regime, tried to tear her from the sky. Finally, after months that felt like centuries, she sensed it, a massive, singular spike of residual divine power, far stronger than any of the scattered lesser parts. This was the magnificent, original cedar chest, the sarcophagus Seth had initially used before the gruesome dismemberment, and it had been swept out to sea, riding the powerful currents across the Great Green to a distant, foreign shore, far beyond the protection of the Egyptian gods. The currents carried her across the terrifying expanse of water to Phoenicia, to the glorious, timber-rich port city of Byblus, a place alien to the names and traditions of Kemet. She landed, transforming back into a woman, but a woman utterly consumed by sorrow and the desperation of her singular mission. The chest was gone. It had washed ashore and embedded itself, magically fusing, into the root system of a massive, magnificent tamarisk tree, which immediately began to grow at an impossible, divine speed. The local king and queen of Byblos, completely oblivious to the cosmic drama and the entombed god they were now hosting, were astounded by the rapid, miraculous growth of this enormous tree. The intoxicating fragrance, the sheer power and unnatural beauty emanating from its trunk was overwhelming. They had the tree cut down, intending to use its unparalleled wood for a royal pillar, the central, weight-bearing support for their majestic palace hall. Imagine the utter horror, the sheer indignity. Osiris, the once glorious king of eternity and judge of the dead, was now encased within a mortal pillar, permanently supporting the roof of a human palace in a land that did not even know his name. Isis arrived at Byblos just as the final colossal pillar was installed. She knew she could not simply storm the palace and unleash her full divine fury. Such an act would expose her true identity to Seth's far-reaching network and incite a devastating foreign war. She adopted a new persona, a silent, humble nursemaid. She seated herself near a local well, radiating a subtle, irresistible divine warmth, a scent of ambrosia and fresh linen, which immediately drew the attention of the queen's handmaidens. They were captivated by her otherworldly presence and calming demeanor. When the queen, Astarte, heard of this mysterious, comforting woman who seemed untouched by earthly grime, she invited her into the palace to care for her sickly son, Prince Meneros. Isis accepted the role immediately. She used her position to get dangerously close, spending every waking hour near the great fragrant tamarisk pillar, whispering the names of power, silently communicating with the entombed essence of Osiris. She treated the young prince not with mortal medicine, but with the terrifying, slow-burning fire of immortality. Every night, she would hold the child near the fireplace, slowly incinerating his mortality, attempting to grant him eternal, unbreaking life, while she herself transformed into the kite and circled the pillar, weeping her hot, divine tears onto the wood, softening the protective layers of the tree. But the queen, Astarte, was only a mortal, and was not privy to these profound divine secrets. One night, driven by suspicion, she burst into the chamber, saw her son seemingly engulfed in ritual flames, the necessary process of immortality, and screamed, shattering the powerful, fragile spell. Isis, her patience exhausted and her entire mission threatened by this mortal interruption, instantly revealed her true, terrifying, shining form. The palace guards froze in mid-step. Astarte fell to her knees, instantly recognizing the raw, burning divinity that stood before her, shimmering with power and grief. Isis did not punish the queen for her foolish intrusion. Instead, she demanded only one thing, pointing a finger heavy with magic toward the colossal, fragrant pillar that supported the world around them. "Give me the column that holds up your roof, and nothing more." The terrified king and queen immediately complied. With a single word of precise power, Isis severed the pillar from the ceiling without disturbing the rest of the structure. She did not destroy the precious wood. Instead, she carefully peeled away the tamarisk bark layer by layer, revealing the magnificent cedar coffin of Osiris within, still perfectly preserved, gleaming with trapped magic. It was a victory so profound it almost blinded her with hope. She had the king's body whole again, protected within the secure chest. She wrapped the outer tamarisk shell in fine linen and consecrated it, creating a great, powerful cult object for the people of Byblos. Then, with her prize secured, she brought the chest back across the Great Green, back to the Nile. She hid it deep within the most remote, impenetrable part of the delta swamps, believing her long journey was finally over and that Seth could never discover their secret hiding place. She was utterly wrong. Isis thought the deep papyrus thickets, the endless, suffocating maze of the delta, was her ultimate protection. She believed the secret hiding place, swaddled in mist and primordial silence, was impenetrable to the forces of chaos. She was tragically mistaken, for she forgot one terrifying, essential element. Seth doesn't search like a mortal man or even a disciplined god. Seth doesn't rely on sight or tracking or patience. He relies on chaos. The delta itself, a churning landscape of water and unstable earth, was an extension of his storm-shattered power, a low, wet, primordial land where order struggled desperately to hold its grip. He sent not soldiers, but his essence, the destructive breath of the sirocco, the punishing heat of the desert wind, to scan the area. He commanded the air itself to smell the disruption, to feel the cold, unnatural presence of a death that defied the natural cycle of the world. The scent of aged cedar wood, the salt of the great green, and the unbearable, lingering power of a murdered, imprisoned god wafted up through the reeds like a beacon in the storm. Seth did not need a map. He followed the corruption itself. When Seth breached the sanctuary, the chest was not smashed by simple force, but instantly disintegrated by pure, incandescent, insane fury. He didn't just retrieve the body. He unleashed the full destructive spectrum of his godly wrath upon the contents. This was not about securing the throne anymore. This was about ensuring the annihilation of his brother's very existence, preventing the possibility of restoration. 14 fragments. That was the magic number of destruction. 14 perfect, necessary pieces of the king scattered across the breadth of Egypt, flung into the muddy currents of the Nile, tossed onto barren desert sands, buried under shifting dunes where only jackals dared to tread. He ensured that no single location held more than a sliver of the whole, guaranteeing that resurrection would be an impossibility, a foolish dream. When Isis returned to her secret sanctuary, perhaps bringing small offerings or gentle words of comfort, she found the earth stained black, the reeds flattened, and the cedar chest pulverized into splinters. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than any storm, confirming the unbelievable horror that had transpired. When she finally grasped the horrific truth that her husband was not only dead but atomized, reduced to bloody, scattered geographical markers, her grief transcended mere weeping. Her sorrow became a cosmic engine, a fierce, protective determination that became the single solitary purpose of the universe. She screamed a silent oath that shook the very foundations of the Duat, registering the vow across all the planes of existence. She transformed herself not into the beautiful kestrel of her earlier flight, but into a relentless, tireless scavenger, a shadow traversing the length and breadth of the two lands, fueled by nothing but relentless, agonizing, undying love. This was the start of the greatest treasure hunt in all of mythology, but the prize was not gold. The prize was viscera, bone, and the cold, mute fragments of lost majesty. Every village, every obscure bend in the Nile, every barren wadi, and every bustling marketplace became her hunting ground, her eyes scanning the debris of the world. She recruited her sister Nephthys, who, despite being miserably married to the monster Seth, was loyal only to the idea of cosmic order and the sanctity of family. Nephthys, the mistress of hidden places, became her essential guide, helping her navigate the deepest, darkest parts of the desert, places where Seth's influence was darkest and most chaotic. The search was an impossible, endless pilgrimage. a piece found near the sacred city of Abydos, another perhaps swept into the cold embrace of the Mediterranean Sea, a third buried beneath the scorching sands of the western desert where only serpents lived. Each fragment recovered was a victory snatched from the maw of oblivion, but each recovery only highlighted the sheer impossibility of the task. For months, perhaps years, time ceased to mean anything to a goddess driven mad by her purpose. She continued the agonizing collection. Slowly, painstakingly, the body of Osiris began to re-emerge, mapped out in scattered, precious relics, purified and wrapped in the finest linen she could conjure. She had found 13 of the 14 crucial parts: the head, the glorious heart, the limbs, the spine, all secured, purified, and ready for their sacred reconstruction. But one piece remained, eternally missing, the final, crucial fragment that Seth had ensured would be lost forever, devoured by the scavenger fish of the river, specifically the dreaded Oxyrhynchus fish. The divine phallus, the symbol of generation, of renewal, of the unending cycle of life and royal succession, was gone, swallowed by the cold, deep waters of the Nile. This was Seth's final, most terrible victory, ensuring that Osiris, even if reassembled and brought back to brief, shadowy life, could never fully live again in the way a king, a progenitor must. The task was not over, but the terms of the resurrection had just become infinitely, tragically limited. Seth had believed that scattering the corpse was his final, unassailable safety measure, ensuring that the king of the living could never again ascend the throne. But he fundamentally underestimated the depth of devotion and the sheer, terrifying power of a divine sorceress scorned. Isis, the great enchanter, did not succumb to conventional grief. Her tears were not merely water. They were liquid magic, capable of carving canyons into the desert stone. Her sorrow ripped through the veil separating the lands, reaching even the sun-boat of Ra himself, momentarily chilling the eternal heat of the celestial journey. The search began, not as a mournful procession, but as a desperate, relentless hunt, spanning generations in the timeless perception of the gods. The pieces of Osiris were sown across the entirety of Kemet, buried in the sand, submerged in the primordial mire, or tossed onto the desolate red land that Seth now claimed as his murderous domain. And Isis was not alone. In the most shocking betrayal of the destroyer's reign, Nephthys, the very wife of Seth and sister of Isis, abandoned her murderous spouse to join the quest for resurrection. The bond of sisterhood proved thicker, darker, and infinitely more powerful than the cursed knot of marriage. Together, these two divine women, the contrasting forces of life and decay, took the form of the kites, the majestic birds of prey. Their synchronized, haunting cries echoed across the Nile Valley, the famous lamentations of Isis and Nephthys, a song of cosmic despair that still shivers in the oldest stones of Egypt. Each discovery was a miracle born of sheer willpower. They found the shin bone near the sacred city of Abydos, the rib cage, gnawed and stripped bare, nestled deep in the fertile delta mud, the magnificent head, hidden deep in the unforgiving deserts of the west, guarded only by silence and the scorching breath of the wind. Isis, the weaver of spells, did not simply collect these relics. With every recovered piece, she instantly wove powerful protective incantations, binding the Ka, the physical form, to the Ba, the traveling soul, before the essence could entirely dissipate into the ether. She knew that the integrity of the body was the only path to immortality. If even one piece was irrevocably lost, Osiris would forever be incomplete, a shattered king permanently barred from fulfilling the ultimate function of the resurrected. The search continued, grueling and endless, until they had collected 13 of the 14 divine parts of the god. The final, most intimate piece, the life-giving phallus, was irrevocably lost. Seth had ensured it was not merely discarded on the land, but consumed by the treacherous creatures of the deep, specifically the 3 sacred fish of the Nile, the Oxyrhynchus, the Phagris, and the Lepidodus. This was an act of complete symbolic destruction, rendering the king eternally sterile in the physical realm. The sacred river had swallowed the very essence of Osiris's power of generation, sealing his fate as the eternal ruler of the dead, never again the king of the living earth. This devastating realization was the moment when Isis truly ascended to her title as the greatest magician among all the gods. Facing the impossible tragedy, she did not surrender to grief. She channeled it into a focused, terrible, white-hot magical power. She had to create what was destroyed, with the purest clay, sacred river mud, and potent spells drawn directly from the deep well of Nu, the abyss itself. She fashioned a magnificent golden substitute, a powerful, magical replacement, infused with the vitality of the setting sun. This was the pivotal, groundbreaking moment in cosmic history, the very first act of high necromancy. It established the eternal precedent for all subsequent embalming and mummification rites that would define Kemet for thousands of years. She began the meticulous process of binding the pieces together, using layers of sacred linen wrappings and powerful amulets. The body was now anatomically whole, yet utterly inert. It was a perfect vessel, but silent and empty of the breath of life. The wrappings, the initial mummy, were not merely to hold him together. They were a pressurized cocoon of cosmic potential, meticulously preparing for the impossible resurrection. Then, drawn by the overwhelming scent of deep magic and the profound silence of death, Anubis, the jackal god, arrived. The son of Nephthys, or in some traditions, the bastard son of Osiris himself, he took charge of the final stages. He became the first divine embalmer, guiding the hands of Isis, instructing her in the precise ritual alignment of the 4 canopic jars, ensuring the preservation of the organs for the journey into the Duat. The king lay ready, wrapped in his shroud of white linen, a beacon of stillness awaiting the ultimate spark. Isis stood over her terrible, magnificent creation. The universe itself held its breath, straining against the silence. This was her final, terrifying gamble, to breathe life back into a corpse that had been scattered, consumed, and remade by sheer, defiant will. She transformed one last time, taking the form of the kestrel, the black-winged bird of the sky, hovering above her husband's still form. She beat her wings with such catastrophic fury that the air crackled with pure divine energy, forcing a faint breath back into the lungs that had been silent since the coffer sealed shut. A shadow of life returned. Not the robust, laughing vitality of the king who once ruled the living, but a shimmering, pale reflection, a powerful, eternal shade. It was enough. It was the greatest, most defining act of creation that would ever be told. The shadow of life returned, and instantly the newly formed principles of air and moisture, Shu and Tefnut, were swallowed by the limitless, lightless expanse of Nu. The great loneliness, Ra, stood upon the Benben stone, his immense power chilled by a familiar, crushing fear, the terror of absolute nothingness returning, the fear that his first agonizing act of creation had failed immediately. He had birthed them through an act of sheer will, yet they vanished into the primordial ocean like smoke in a windless cavern. The world, which was still nothing more than possibility, was a terrifying place, a cosmic nursery where the first newborns were instantly consumed. Ra screamed into the void, a sound that cracked across the universe not in anger, but in utter, devastating parental panic. He truly believed he was alone once more, staring down the precipice of non-existence. In that shattering moment of divine despair, Ra pulled the greatest weapon and tool of ultimate vision from his own being. He ripped the solitary, all-seeing eye, the Uchat, from his forehead and sent it flying into the blackness like a flaming, desperate missile. "Go," he commanded it, echoing through the infinite void. "Find my children, bring them back to the point of creation, or let the unmaking begin and let everything return to the endless dark." The Eye of Ra, independent and blazing with incandescent solar fury, hurtled through the abyssal depths, consuming darkness with the sheer violence of its light. It searched for epochs, navigating the formless ocean where time had not yet been counted and dimensions had yet to be invented. Ra remained suspended, waiting, his own power diminished by the loss of his sight, relying only on the faint, echoing sound of his children's newly formed essence somewhere in the impossible distance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of agonizing separation, an eternity measured only in the depth of a god's fear, the Eye returned. It pierced the gloom, guiding the lost ones, Shu and Tefnut, back to the muddy surface of the Benben. They were exhausted, battered by the nascent chaos, but they were safe. They stood before their father. The relief that washed over Ra was so overwhelming, so profound, that his essence cracked under the strain of the emotion. He wept. And these were not the salty, simple tears of mortal sorrow, but liquid sunbeams, droplets of pure, concentrated divine light bursting from his eye socket and raining down upon the primordial mud. As these tears, the very first tears ever shed in existence, the physical manifestation of a creator's joy, hit the surface of the earth to be, they did not dissipate, they solidified, they took form. They became the first mortals, the very first beings destined to live and die beneath the sun he would eventually raise. Humanity was born from the raw emotion of a god's reunion with his lost children, sprung forth from the sheer, ecstatic relief of Ra. But the tears had another, equally vital purpose. With the initial principles now stable and reunited, Shu and Tefnut, air and moisture, coupled.